representation from multiple countries here as well. Gulnara is actually from Azerbaijan, but she lives in Denmark, and she is an expert on various countries in the topic of the rise of populism and dangers to democracy. And then we have Tanzania, we have Ukraine, and we have Finland. So you might think, so what's common to all these countries? But we'll probably get to that. We'll find some common ground. I would like to ask you to introduce yourselves in terms of like what you do for work, because I'm sure most of the audience doesn't know. So I'd like to maybe start with you, Gulnara.
Sure. Thank you very much, Johanna. Good afternoon, everyone. I am from International Media Support in Copenhagen, Denmark. We are a global non-profit organization working across 4 continents to support good journalism and promote freedom of expression. I'm very delighted to be here and look forward to our interesting debate.
I'm Hanne, working as a president of the journalists in Finland, and of course working for our members, right? Quite widely working with different kind of things, and right now we are just having collective agreements with our Yleisradio company, so public broadcasting radio company. Lots of different kinds of work.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Sergiy from Ukraine. I am president of National Union of Journalists of Ukraine, and my union is the biggest journalist organization or NGO in my country. And the main problem or threat for journalists in Ukraine is, to my mind, system impunity or high level of physical aggression against journalists, because our monitoring fixes more than 80 cases of physical aggression against journalists each year. So I think that safety of journalists is our biggest priority. But we support many important discussions about standards, about disinformation, about propaganda, about media regulation and press freedom too. Okay.
My name is Sengiyumva, Gasirigwa. They're very long, just like how far I come. I'm very far. I'm coming from very far. I work for the Media Institute of Southern Africa, Tanzania chapter. Media Institute of Southern Africa is a freedom of expression organization that works in 11 SADC member countries. SADC is Southern African Development Community, and we have chapters. We were headquartered in Windhoek, Namibia. Now we are moving to Lusaka, Zambia. Our basic function is to promote freedom of expression, and both online and offline. And below that, we are working towards promoting press freedom as well as access to information.
I would like to start with you and the situation in Tanzania. I don't know how many people of you are familiar with this, but if you look at the World Press Freedom Index from this year, 2019, Tanzania has dropped 25 points in the ranking. So whereas it used to be number 93 in the world in press freedom, it now ranks at 118. And I'll just read to you some of what it says in the description. With the adoption of draconian legislation, the closure of media outlets and the expulsion of press freedom defenders, Tanzania has suffered an unprecedented decline in press freedom. Nicknamed the bulldozer, John Magufuli has tolerated no criticism of himself or his policies since becoming president in 2015. How do you see this situation in Tanzania? This is like, as it says here, an unprecedented drop in the ranking. So what is the situation in the field like?
I think it's quite different. You know, I've practiced journalism for 9 years before I went into advocacy, And we are working, with journalists from across the country. And I think, yes, that's the report, but I think most of the stories, they are hyped. They're very much hyped. Because if you see the situation in the country, it's not the way it is, described by Western media and especially social media. Yes, yes, there are laws. The new laws that have been, passed between, 2015 and, 2016, and yes, there are challenges within those very laws, provisions that, are not good, but there are also provisions that are very good. That they are, for example, it's for the first time now we are recognizing journalism as a profession in the country. This is something that we did not recognize in the past. Yes, there are people who have been detained here and there as a result of the implementation of these laws, but we cannot conclusively say that the situation is very bad as it is portrayed, because, for example, this year, we have no journalist who is in jail up to this moment. Even human rights defenders, there is no one in jail. Yes, they have been detained, but released, but as in jail, no. No one has ever been killed, since 2012. 2012, that was when a journalist was killed by the police. But ever since, no one has ever been killed up to this moment. There have been cases where some have disappeared, because we cannot conclusively say that they are dead or what, because they disappeared. And the only people who can say, probably, who can say where they are or what, is the government. And it hasn't, said where these people are. Those who have been detained, yes, I'm sure you have cases like that of Eric Kabendera. Yes, he was detained. Some allegations, but we can, those of us in the media, we cannot conclusively say why he was detained. I think he only and the state, they are the ones who can really tell us why, he was detained. But given the statistics, previously, all these harassments, there were so many, but compared to the time being, I think things are improving. This year, yes, there have been a couple of also suspension of newspapers, but for some time, but no paper has been banned, for example, this year. Absolutely. No paper. So, and the number, is increasing. Right now, for example, we have like 230 publications that have been re-registered under the new law. We have, for example, more than 120 radio stations that are operating around, 40-something TV stations that are operational. There is a law that was introduced, an online content regulation in 2018, that required also the platforms, online platforms, to be registered. I think it's because of the rise of disinformation, etc., etc. That's when authorities decided to come in and see whether they can be registered. And according to the report by the Tanzania Communication Regulatory Authority, by October 2018, like over 210 online platforms. I'm talking about online televisions, online radio, and platforms like Jamii Forum, if some of you know about it, have been registered, and even and bloggers as well have been registered. There are challenges with regards to the registration of the bloggers, but we for some of us, we think that it's a good move because at least you are trying to, to curb the rising level of disinformation, which I also see that is a big thing here. For us, we thought it was only in that part of the world, but I see the same thing here. Since morning, people, since afternoon, they are talking about, disinformation in the European Union. Yeah.
However, there have been closures of media outlets, and there have been, arrests of journalists, and you talked about this disappearance as well. So it doesn't sound so rosy. Are media outlets actually able to criticize the president and his actions?
Now, is that the only thing that we need to do as media? Just criticize the president? No. There are those who can criticize, and he has said, even the minister in charge of information has clearly stated that you are not prohibited from criticizing. But how do you criticize? That is what makes the difference. But criticism, constructive criticism, that one is allowed. Because otherwise, of the 230, newspapers, you would find like 50 or 70, you're banned, you'll find a good number of journalists in jail, etc., etc. Yes, I cannot deny that there are those cases that have been here and there, but compared to the number of media outlets that are operating, you cannot conclusively say that the situation is that worse.
We could, of course, continue talking about this forever, but we only have so much time, so I want to move on to Ukraine. And speaking of presidents, the new president of Ukraine has been, of course, in the news in Finland also quite a lot, because he used to be a TV star and an actor. So this is an interesting situation. Are the media allowed to criticize him?
I think that now Ukraine is at the epicenter of growing populism in Europe, and our president, Zelensky, who was an actor or comedian, is an example of a populist leader, and he tries to use some media technologies, and he demonstrates that he ignores traditional media and journalists. But now I think that maybe we see a big problem for journalists for future now starts. And I think that Zelensky, as a populist politician, he thinks that he has a direct channel of contact with an audience that bypasses media. And he demonstrates that media now have lost the monopoly to deliver news to the audience. And for example, President Zelensky now twice gave interviews to his car Tesla, without journalists, without media, but just he recorded the video in Tesla and spread through social networks, through YouTube, and he was happy. And once he gave interview to a hired actor who acted as a journalist. He gave we demanded special press conference on his 100 days as president, but he reacted by this big, more than 1 hour interview. But Ukrainians, we saw at this interview our current president who acted as president in comedy, and we saw journalist who acted as prime minister in this comedy in the past. So it was a joke for traditional media, but it was good production for citizens, maybe, because everybody discussed about this big interview actor to actor. And the third case was when after our campaign, when we criticized him that he didn't give any press conference or any press events for traditional media. So he organized his first press conference as president as memorable event. It took place at a new food hall in central Kyiv and lasted for more than 12 hours. Changed journalists every half of hour. And President spoke with more than 300 Ukrainian and foreign journalists during the press marathon. And now he presents it as the longest press conference ever held by any sitting president. So we see this as joke, but first stage was very fun, but second stage now is very dangerous because his team, presidential team, threatens media workers' imprisonment for alleged manipulation, and audits and penalties for media channels if they are not profitable. So Ukrainian government now wants to bring criminal responsibility for spreading fakes and manipulating public consciousness very quickly. A draft of such a bill is due in parliament by the end of this year. Now we are organizing some campaign against anti-fake, against quickly anti-fake bill in Ukraine, and debating with his team. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I want to also quote from the World Press Freedom Index one sentence it says about Ukraine, which has something to do with Finland. It says that the separatist-controlled areas in the east are still no-go areas without critical journalists or foreign observers. And this has a connection to Finland because a Finnish man called Janos Putkonen, who moved from Finland first to Donetsk and then to Luhansk, and he was heading the Doni News propaganda outlet from there, and now he is running from Luhansk, Finland's most notorious so-called fake news website called Amberlehti. And he was also working as like a press officer over there in those areas, and he was banning Finnish reporters from accessing Donetsk. And this is like an interesting situation where a Finnish person is doing this sort of propaganda. Have you heard of this person?
Yes, I heard the problem or conflict, or in fact Ukraine is a victim of Russian aggression and victim of this hybrid actions against Ukraine. We think that Ukraine is the first training zone for Russia for this dirty tricks with this disordering of democracy involved. But I think that problem with occupied territory is quite different with Ukraine or territory which are controlled by Ukrainian government. So now we demand press freedom from our government, and we demonstrate some solidarity with journalists who are imprisoned by Russia or by separatists in Donetsk, and our priority is that Stanislav Aseyev, who more than 2 years now imprisoned in occupied Donetsk, should be free.
Thank you. Moving on to Finland then. Hanne, is freedom of the press threatened in Finland also? Because we are most often seen as one of the top countries in the world, but do we have a problem with this also? How do you see that as the chair of the journalist union?
When I listen to my colleagues, of course we are quite far from imprisoning the journalists, but I think one big basic thing is that we have mutual understanding in Finland that we want to be a democracy, and we need to have a free press for that, and we need the press freedom for that. And it's been for a long time. It's been everybody would have wanted that the people and the politicians and everyone. That's the ground for our press freedom. But as we all know, we all Finns know that we have had raising voices for questioning and undermining press in Finland, and of course we have to notice that, and we have to see it, and we have to hear it. But I wouldn't say that our press freedom is under threat.
Do you see that some journalists are being silenced in Finland?
Yes. We have these hate campaigns against journalists going on, and some even years going on. And of course the main goal is to silence those journalists. And that is a big question. And hopefully most of those cases has been they come out to the public, so everybody knows about them, and that's really important. And we have also maybe other things, not just, for example, self-censorship is also a problem, because there are issues. Our journalists don't want to talk, they don't want to write, they don't want to tell, because they're afraid of this hate speech, these hate campaigns. There used to be things like wolves or abortion or even food, but these days we know they are mostly immigration questions or Russia. So we know some journalists are avoiding those questions, and that is also a thing that we really have to notice. We have to be alert for those. Yeah.
That's also something that might be quite difficult to quantify and actually show any numbers that how many people are actually being silenced or self-censoring, because that's not something that journalists actually advertise doing, and it might be even difficult to just recognize it to yourself that you're doing that.
Yeah, that's true. But we know from surveys that the number is, at this point, it's not very big. It's less than 10%, even less than 5% in some points. But anyhow, we have to be we really have to notice this problem. We have to talk about it among the journalists. So and help each other for not doing that.
Thank you. So Gulnara, how do you see all of this from a more international perspective? Are there commonalities in terms of threats to press freedom in the countries that you work with?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I really wanted to thank the organizers for bringing two speakers from outside of the EU, because we cannot live in our own bubble. And if we turn a blind eye to what's going on in countries like Tanzania, Ukraine, and other countries of the world where freedom of expression is increasingly under threat, then we might end up with problems existing in our own countries. And just one of the examples is a recent series of attacks on journalists in the heart of Europe. I am reminding of the case of Daphne Caruana Galizia, who was murdered in Malta for her investigative reporting. And there are many other examples, and media is increasingly under attack in Europe, in the very EU member states. When it comes to whether there are any common threats, yes, I've been listening with great interest and also concern to my colleagues from Ukraine and Tanzania, and we have this saying in the Russian language, Potemkin villages. It's just when you try to present something nice to cover something bad up. And in Tanzania there has been this argument that there is an abundance of media outlets existing, but as a human rights lawyer and a researcher, I've been researching the situation in Tanzania and other countries where freedom of expression is under threat. What are the working conditions of all those media houses? To which extent they are independent? How about the level of self-censorship? What happens when these journalists are detained, when they are tried, whether there is a fair trial for them? That's one example. Then from Ukraine, we've heard about this beautiful press marathon that the president has organized, but at the same time we know that this is the very president who attacked a female reporter when she approached him with a question. So that sort of PR they are trying to create in order to cover up violations, and we should be very mindful of the fact that these guys, they continue working against the odds in their countries, and they need support. Lots of threats. It's physical threats, psychological threats, digital threats, of course, and it's all common across 4 continents.
How about the, I'm going to want to continue with you a little bit more. How about election meddling that we talked about in a previous panel? How do you see that panning out from your perspective, this information?
Well, I think it's a very dangerous trend, and it's spreading, and we know that in many cases that would be one country's interference into affairs of another country. However, I would also like to remind that in some countries, like in some dictatorship countries or the countries with authoritarian rule, as Tanzania is, for example, the government is using disinformation and fake news to spread fear and to promote their own agenda.
So also, of course, we don't want to just sort of talk about dystopian views and bad developments here. So I would also like to ask you, what kind of solutions do you see?
Well, you and I, we had a very fascinating chat last night over a nice dinner in downtown Helsinki, and we both agree, we are both on the same page that disinformation is not something that you can fight completely, but this is something you can live with and you can manage. So the solutions would be how to manage disinformation. And I very much agree with Ricardo, who said earlier that good journalism is the best answer. So we should strive to support good journalism in countries where journalism is under threat. We should show solidarity, and we should also look at other ways rather than just supporting production of good content and distribution of good content. And we have been talking about social media platforms, internet intermediaries. We have mentioned them many times as something which is evil, but I would like to remind this audience that in many countries of the world, those social media platforms is the only possible place for independent voices to express themselves. This is the only place for civil society and peaceful protesters to organize and discuss. So from this perspective, freedom of expression on social media platforms should be protected. However, the social media platforms, they should be held into account. And how we can do that? I say we promote and demote. For example, there is International Fact-Checking Network, and they have 72 members. From Denmark, it's Checkit, Danish fact-checking platform, and from Norway, it's Faktisk. And I remember that there was like also the Mikko, you presented earlier. You used to be part of the fact-checking network, but then you
do full-time, all the time fact-checking. That's the only problem.
Yeah. But this actually allows fact-checking organizations to demote fake news, and that gives impact, because fact-checking alone by itself is not necessarily a solution, because again, we spoke about that yesterday, that it's often the very same people who check quality media, and this group also checks fact-checking website. But how about other parts of population who are so vulnerable to fake news and disinformation, and they often get it on Facebook? So if bad content is demoted, if people wouldn't see bad content in their Facebook feed, that could be somehow like an immediate solution. Also, I think the platforms, they could engage, like in countries like Ukraine. I hear that Facebook is planning to open an office and engage with the government and civil society and media organizations in Ukraine to discuss co-regulation, how they call it, what can be done, because Ukraine remains a priority country for Facebook, also because of the war with Russia. So the threat of disinformation is huge in Ukraine. So that could be part of the solution, to engage with social media companies at the national level, because at the international level it's still very difficult. Then media literacy has been mentioned as a long-term solution. And again, I was very pleased to hear that we should not only be focusing on the young people, because like older people, they are even more vulnerable and exposed to disinformation. So there is a set of tools, and none of them is a magic wand, but if they are applied together, then there could be a solution to manage disinformation.
Thank you. Going back to Ukraine a bit, because we mentioned fact-checking here. I know in Ukraine there's a very active fact-checking website called Stop Fake. Is that something that's beneficial to Ukraine? Is it working? Are people seeing those fact checks? Are they able to be critical of the government and keep the checks and balances?
Yes, we, my union, we support every media, every project who works with fact-checking, and Stop Fake is very good. But when we're discussing about some state regulation and state reaction on disinformation, on fakes, we are afraid that, especially for Ukraine, that our government, every president, use power just for their power, not for solving problem, but maybe for pressure on critical voices, or some we saw as our previous president labeled or divided media, good media and bad media, good journalists and not good, patriotic and patriotic. And then power or government tried to pressure on critical or opposition media. So we are very careful with this discussion, and now we are asking our new president, our new government to organize a very open discussion about future media regulation. Just when our president or our government receive trust, then we support them. Just after we support just trustful politicians.
And is fact-checking, does it play a role in Tanzanian media landscape?
Fact-checking?
Mm.
Not so much, and that is one of the contributing factors to the press freedom thing. Because, you know, there is a lack of professionalism in the media, lack of editorial independence because of interference of politicians, businesses, etc. And if you go through our media, I mean newspapers, you know, listen to their content, you find there's a lot of challenges in terms of errors. I mean, in terms of facts, you know, that are not correct. And you wonder that what happened. Some of the most trusted media organizations, and you wonder that how did something like this slip away. So I just wanted to note one thing, that the challenges to press freedom, the way we see them, the way they are portrayed, you know, in the media and social media in particular, you see that the attack is focused on the state only. But there are so many things that are our own making as in the industry itself. So there are those things that we as journalists, we need to do. As owners, for example, you know, people are not paid. You know, Gulnara was also touching on something like that. The media houses are not sustainable. The journalists are not paid. Sometimes they go even for a whole year, you know, without pay. And you wonder how these people survive. And if there's something, for example, now there's elections, no government elections this time. There's general elections next year. This is the time when politicians take that advantage. They know that these journalists are not paid, then they tag them along. There is no way you can write anything against the very person that is, you know, giving you a lift to move around during the campaigns. Otherwise, they will drop you anywhere, because it has happened before. Someone is, you know, picked by a president. It could be a presidential candidate. It could be a parliamentary candidate. They move around. The next morning, if they read something that is contrary to what they believe in, they will drop you right there and then. Whether it's a bush or whatever, they will drop you, and you'll find your way back. So there's a lot of things that are happening that are not portrayed, you know, that are not, you know, voiced out, but we only focus on one area in the state, and yes, the state is supposed to take, you know, center stage in everything, but we cannot deny the fact that we also have a role to play in our press freedom.
At the end of this panel, I would like to now take a few audience questions. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but I think we can take a few. You get the mic, so everybody, okay?
Right, thank you. Actually, I want to just make a short observation concerning the press freedom in Finland that Hanne just spoke earlier. I want to make a clarification that, you know, when we talk of, you omitted to actually clarify that any sort of harassment of journalists is not done by states, but it's mainly by non-state actors. And they are usually like right-wing populists or racists or anti-feminists who do not like the particular, you know, journalist's position on certain issues, and then they go on the attack. But it is very rare to really have the state targeting journalists and then thereby causing what do we call it, self-censorship. I mean, it happened to Johanna herself right here. She is a living example of what happened. She was threatened by some right-winger up north, and the whole thing ended up in court, you know. And it was a very typical case to see that, you know, it is actually the public, more or less, or non-state actors here in Finland sometimes, or even maybe us, may even happen all across in Europe. So I wanted just that clarification. The other thing is that, you see, journalism is, who we say it's in a crisis, we should also think about the sustainability. The model now is a problem. The situation in which we now are is that the mainstream newspapers do not get adequate funding from advertising, and therefore the funding situation is really critical. And what we have to fight now for, is to really figure out, is it really proper for quality information to go behind a paywall, you know, so that people who can hardly afford rather pay for quality information, you know. Then papers like New York Times and Wall Street Journal and all of these things, they have all run behind paywall. They have become like gated communities. And if you cannot afford, then you go without information. But it now makes that, you know, it is led to a situation whereby it is just the rich people who can afford good quality information. And then the rest of others who cannot afford, we are not satisfied with fake news and misinformation. And this is what we have to also consider in our debate.
Hanne, do you want to comment on that?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question. You had like many questions. Would you address one, or about the paywall, or?
What I said, I didn't say, it wasn't a question. All I was saying was that
Yeah, okay.
your mention of Finland, I mean, press freedom being threatened here, and I was just saying that you forgot to add that it is not threatened from the states, I said, but from right-wingers and racists and anti-feminist people who do not like particular journalists, and then they target them. That's why I mentioned Johan.
Yes, you're quite right. You're saying everything perfectly, telling how it's in Finland. And one of the big, it sounds, when I've been listening to you colleagues, it sounds, of course, quite Western world problem, but the big question in Finland is the problem with the finances in media, of course, and about the paywall thing, that our problems can be that kind of problems. Yes.
Thank you. We have two more questions and we're not going to take more. It's Mikko and
Thank you. To me, having thought about that, I think the democracy, one of the biggest questions is the media pluralism. And I would like to pose, like, let's say we have quite a set of here, so is the media pluralism, so the amount of good media an issue? Because some bigger will survive. I mean, we see the New York Times getting more subscription, let's hope in some of the national players will do, but what will happen to the media, the plurality, because that's the democracy. So, and while you're probably thinking just of something on the fact-checking, because fact-checking, many people think it's always like, you know, they kind of promote themselves, and fact-checking is not going to solve the problems here. But I mean, actually, I was in South Africa, in Cape Town, in a meeting, and it's a kind of upcoming trend in Africa as well, because it's technologically, it's one of the saviest thing. Because I haven't heard many technology innovation, to be honest, from the media sector that really would do good for the content. And in that way, I just urge all the journalists as well that it's practically the same tools. It's just a different way. I mean, you talk verification, we talk fact-checking. And so there's a lot of potential on that one bringing forward. But yes, the question on the media pluralism, because that's what I'm worried about.
who wants to pick that one up?
Should I?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's...
No, thank you very much. It's a great question and a great comment that you've raised. And yes, media pluralism is absolutely, totally important for democracy. However, we should remember that, in some states, some countries, the level of polarization is so high that abundance of media outlets wouldn't bring the pluralism in a way how you and I, how we in this room understand it. And I think from this perspective, it's also very important to engage with the audiences, engage offline, how you guys do in Finland, and that's very admirable. You have this Finland Talks and ongoing events for your readership and your audience. So yes, pluralism is very important, but there is also the need to have a culture of tolerant public debate around it.
Thank you. And the last question before we then conclude the day with our speakers.
Actually, listening shows there are stories about Tanzania and Ukraine. I can't but make comparison. Unfortunate one, I would say, because here in the hall there is Ruslan Katsaba, a journalist from Ukraine whose court case has been postponed innumerable number of times since his full acquittal in 2016. While in Tanzania you have Eric Kabendera, yes, whose court case has been postponed for 7 times. So it's kind of tricky. Unfortunately, another Ukrainian journalist who, as far as I know, has been invited to this conference by the Union of Journalists, Vasily Muravitsky, can't be here because he is under house arrest. And this case has been recognized by Amnesty International. It's included, like Katsaba's case, it's included in the State Department report, so it's verified, it's checked, politically motivated grounds are clear. So what is your stance? How do you take these kind of situations? So, and what are you going to do with Eric Kabendera, with Moravitsky and Katsaba?
This one is not right. Thank you very much for the question. You see, there is one challenge in Tanzania. If the case is in court, we are not allowed to talk about it. I mean, in terms of commenting what is going on, because it will be like interfering, the proceedings of the court, and that's a fact. So if because it will be like you are influencing now the court, the decisions that will be made by the court. But as for the cases that are not in court, if it's anything that we can do apart from the court, that one we are doing. Because Gulnara was talking about engaging, and here we are talking about engaging the state. The state in terms of the ministry that is concerned, the ministers and all other players. We can engage them in a way of seeking the position that if we could, if their case can be removed from the court, and people decide to discuss it out of the court proceedings, then there's something that we can do. But what we are trying to do right now, we are doing advocacy from our own part, just influencing, creating an understanding to the key players, that is the state and the other players, of the situation and why it is important, for the press to be free. And we're also doing campaigns, countrywide, to get, the public support. Because also, it's very hard to attain this kind of freedom if you don't have public support. And to gain public support, you need, for them to trust you. There's that case of trust that was talked about here. That's a very big issue also in Tanzania. But how do the media, trust you because of whatever is happening? So it is very hard, and all the issues that are happening. For example, there's a small case where a movie star was having a press conference just like this. And when she finished, she reached to her bag and, pulled some money and, spread to the journalists. And journalists, started fighting. And it's something that was covered in social media and it went viral. And for us in the media, we just attacked the, through statements and all this kind of, condemnation. We directed them to the movie star. But we forgot that we are the ones who have created them. Because each time we go for, stories, we seek for money for the stories to be, written or aired. So you find out that we also, as journalists, have a role to play in these issues. All the problems, yes, there are those which are caused by the state, and I also thank my brother who is now standing, but that for the past 6-7 years, there has been an increasing number of violations from non-state actors. A lot of non-state actors that are violating the media. So, Madam, just to tell you that because the Erika Bendera's case is in court, I find it very hard to comment because, I'm live and, they're listening. So if I comment on anything that, they'll tell you, the case is in court, why are you, talking about this? You're influencing the court decision. So I respectfully, pass that.
So what you tell means that it's ours who should tell about him. It's ours who should tell about him.
Yes, that's why if we seek international support from you guys, then that is. But if it is out of the court, then from our part, we are doing the advocacy. We are also talking to the relevant authorities, from other avenues. But if the case is in court, that is something else.
Okay, I think this question was directed to Sergiy as well.
And there are many cases of some investigations or accusation against Ukrainian journalists, which were started by previous presidential team or administration. And now we demand from officials, from secret services, that they should openly reports about every case. And we condemn every violation of rights of journalists, as Vasily Muravitsky said too, and we demand from authority that we shouldn't afraid our government or our authority that they shouldn't press on journalists in Ukraine. But it's very hard to talk with authority, but we received some first victory because we demanded to organize in special parliamentary hearings about safety of journalists in Ukraine. We demanded more than 2 years, and last week we received this event. Ukrainian parliament, new elected Ukrainian parliament, organized special big parliamentary hearings about safety of Ukrainian journalists, and our influential Minister of Internal Affairs, he supported our initiatives that top-level officials from ministry and the chief of national police should be responsible for reaction on violation against journalists and should every 3 months open a report about investigation about our safety.
Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists.